Welcome to our webinar. Today we'll be reviewing the financial fitness of your chapter and sharing some tips and tricks. Your moderators today will be your 2014 National Financial Secretary, Sherry Souza from California, and myself, Cindy Reddy, your National President-elect from Arizona. During the webinar, if you have any questions, please go to the question box on your screen and type in your question. We'll be responding to your questions, and if we need to follow up, we will do that. So let's get started. A little planning can go a long way toward the health of your chapter. Fiduciary obligation. As an officer, did you know that you have a fiduciary duty, which is a fancy word for basically saying that you have a legal requirement. That requirement is to care for another's assets as if it were your own and to provide meaningful oversight. So for all the officers, your finance and budget and for your chapter are an important part of your responsibilities as an officer. Chapter budget, what really is that? It's a forecast of financial activity over a period of time. So what does that mean? Based on last year's information and changes that we expect for the following year, you can simulate a plan for your chapter. Now we're going to get into the specifics of that a little later in the broadcast, but for example, we know how much we spend on officer travel last year, so we can look at those numbers and project some estimates on increases in airfare and things like that, and then project for the following year. This gives you month by month your forecast, which is your budget. Our Finance and Budget Committee, no matter, I'm looking at the wrong slide. Meaningful oversight. This simply means that you should be looking at your budget on a regular basis. And what that means is at every meeting, you should be reviewing that. It's not something that you just do because you have to at the end of the year for the following year, put in Dropbox or on a shelf and never look at it again. It's truly a tool that you're going to use month by month. So what we'd like you to do is have a finance and budget committee, or if you're a smaller chapter, just have a few of you that are going to provide a check and balance system. Basically what we want you to do is look at the information monthly at your board meetings and make sure that you're on track. And then you can adjust as you need to throughout the year. Sherry?
Hello everyone. I hope that your day is going well. Let's look at the multi-year budget planning. So it's now March and your budget has been established, and perhaps you've had a fundraiser and of course incurred some meeting expenses. It's time to review your revenue and expenses and make sure that things are on track. If you don't already have a budget review on your governing board agenda, add an item that will allow your board to review the budget at least on a quarterly basis. This way you will know if your revenue is measuring up to your expectations and can tighten up your expenses if things are not going as expected. Keep in mind that your fundraising efforts are a huge part of your budget balancing. And if things haven't gone as planned, you'll need to make some adjustments on your spending and expenses. Come the third quarter of the year, somewhere around the beginning of July, you'll have to start planning for your revenue for next year, 2015. Make your sponsorship or strategic partner plan and schedule the implementation for the program during the fourth quarter of the year. The sooner that you can approach your strategic partners for 2015, the better your chances will be for them to plan in their budget for next year. Make sure that your benefits of partnership are developed to provide a good value to your strategic partners. Also in the fourth quarter, your chapter should be putting together a draft budget based on its year's revenue and expenses to present to your Finance and Budget Committee or your governing board members. Your 2014 actuals will be a really good benchmark for your 2015 proposed budget. So let's take a look at the components of a budget. We have revenue and expenses. These are areas of concern. You may have more revenue resources or more expense categories that are noted here on this. This is the foundation of your budget. Subcategories are a good idea to break down the different types of revenue and expenses so that the budget is transparent to the chapter. Depending on the size of your chapter, you can always modify and add in categories that will assist you in tracking. So in the revenue, here we have a basic chapter budget example. This is a great example for smaller chapters. You can find this example in the Leadership Policy and Procedure Manual. You will notice that this budget shows actual costs to help establish budget targets. Don't be afraid to modify this example to fit your chapter needs. This model can be created in Word or any word processing program. Now let's take a look at an expanded chapter budget. Kind of busy here, isn't it? But you know, this is a great example of an expanded chapter budget that works as an Excel spreadsheet. It's a budget at a glance. It's been modified and developed over the years to accommodate the chapter's expenses and revenue resources. If you look down at the bottom there, you'll see some running totals there, totals monthly and annually, differences in actual and budgeted numbers. And then Women's Council operates from a balanced budget system. This does not mean that all the funds raised need to be spent and all the budgeted expenses need to be used. It's a guideline for effectively managing the chapter's monies. So let's take a little closer look here at the revenue. Here's a snapshot of the same budget model that gives us a close-up view of some of the revenue categories used in this chapter. As you will notice, the national and local dues are a very small part of the revenue needed to operate this chapter. Fundraising is essential to the financial success of the chapter. And if you look here, we have the items highlighted in yellow are items that are not on the foundational, the basic chapter budget. So maybe a chapter is incurring interest on a savings account. You want to include that in your revenue. If you are getting revenue from your business resource meetings, from your lunches or whatever, you want to add that in, and any other miscellaneous income or revenue that you may have. So let's take a look at the expenses part of that expanded chapter budget. And by being detailed, your chapter can make sure that unexpected expenses don't jeopardize the health of your budget. So when you look at this page, you'll see that there's accounting fees on here. There's a luncheon for association. There's let's see, a local association officer or executive officers' membership dues are included in that because that's a cost that they incur every year. Credit card or PayPal fees, charitable donations, gifts, that you take to state conferences or anything like that. Also, any future expenditures that you think you may have. Insurance, of course, needs to be on there. Installation expenses, if you guys throw a party or an event for the installation of your chapter officers. Recruitment and retention efforts, if there's going to be any costs involved, you need to be inclusive of those. Retreat, if you have an orientation or a retreat at the end of every year for your incoming leadership team, you need to make sure that you budget for that. Also, if you're taking checks, sometimes return checks are an expense. Speakers, if you're paying for any types of speakers or you buy them gifts or anything like that, you need to make sure that you budget that in there. Any sponsorships that your chapter might have out there for marketing groups or networking groups or associations, you need to make sure that you get detailed about the expenses that your chapter has on an annual basis. So storage unit, if you guys have one of those that you're storing all your event stuff in, you want to be sure and include that. And of course, taxes. If you have to pay a CPA to do your taxes, you need to put that in there as well. And any website expenses. like I said, all these items highlighted in the yellow are not in the small chapter or the basic budget. And then, of course, you want to move forward your 2013 expenses paid in 2014 or any 2015 expenses paid in 2014. So any expenses from the previous year or any that were paid for last year, this year, that type of thing, and your projected carryover. So let's go on to the next one. Remember, officers, governing board responsibilities. At every board meeting, the treasurer should give a report. There should be an actual budget that is handed to the governing board members so that everybody is aware of what's going on with the money in the chapter. Governing board and the officers should review the financial statements, ask questions about any discrepancies between the budgeted and the actual expenses. It's your duty as a board member to find out what the reality of the chapter is. What's really happening here? Can we move forward with what our projections are, or do we need to make alterations to accommodate what's really happening in our chapter? And then a Ways and Means Committee works within a planned budget for each event. You want to make sure that that happens as well. And actual outcomes versus approved budgets. Every month, if you keep on task and you review this on a monthly basis or whenever your board meets, then you can stay within the guidelines and you can fix things very quickly before it gets out of control. So it's also a good idea to make sure, whoops, can we back up one, Martha? Thank you. It's a good idea to make the chair of your events or fundraisers responsible for determining and managing the event budget. That's not to say that the chair needs to do this themselves. It can be delegated. But the chair should be held responsible for the outcome and reporting of the event. The committee should collaborate on the needed costs and revenue for each fundraiser or revenue-generating event that your chapter has and bring a proposed budget to your board for approval. This will keep everything in check and your board informed of the expectations of the events you have. Keep in mind that your budget manager should concentrate on the net derived from the event, but not the gross. Net equals gross income less expenses. We all learned that in Budgeting 101. But remind your board, remind your fundraising chairs. When conversations are had regarding the fundraisers and events, the members should not be misled as to the success of the event. Reporting should always be in terms of net revenue. So, what we're saying here is stay within your budget. I think we can go to the next slide. Ooh.
Things to remember. So let's talk about this a little bit. As you can see from what Sherry's talking about, really, when we're talking about budgets, we are talking about running the chapter just as if you would your business. You have a budget, you look at your expenses, and there are some other things that it's really important to remember. The first thing is that it's important for your chapter to have a general liability insurance policy. That's important because as we go through the year, sometimes things can happen and you just want to have some protection for the chapter. In addition, for each special event that you do, you need to have event insurance. This is to cover the chapter just in case something weird happens at the event. We've had issues with somebody getting hurt and suing a chapter, and it's been quite costly for the chapter. So these are just simple things. Event insurance is not expensive to do if you get it ahead of time on each event. So just make a note, and as part of the planning for each event, make sure you're getting insurance. As you're doing the chapter taxes, it's really important that you find a professional tax consultant locally. And the other thing that we want to talk about is reserve accounts. Some chapters set up a reserve account, and there's just a couple things to know about that. What could be a reserve account? Sometimes chapters will set it up and put a little bit into it each year so that you have a buffer later on if you need it. Or maybe there's a special event that your chapter is involved in, or maybe you have a national officer that's campaigning and moving forward and you want to put some funds in an account and save a little every year so you have something in the future for maybe an installation, that kind of thing. So there's lots of different reasons to do a reserve account, but the one thing we want you to know about when you're doing your end of the year financing is just simply that your operating funds at the end of the year do not need to roll over into a reserve account. They should just roll over into your next year's operating funds. So it's separate from your operating funds. Basically, a reserve account is used for long-term or multi-year planning activities. So let's look at some of the fitness tools. What programs are you using to make your budgeting easy? There's several great programs out there, Quicken, QuickBooks, Excel. Probably Quicken and QuickBooks are even a little easier than Excel. It just depends on how detailed you are and what's simplest for your chapter. But the thing to remember is if you standardize this into some kind of system like this, it's easy year to year for somebody to learn the process and to start over rather than it being manual. And also to put it in a document storage like a Dropbox or Google Docs or iCloud, something like that, so that year to year these types of documents don't disappear. Sometimes unintentionally people get busy in their own lives. Maybe they have a career change and they're no longer in real estate, and all of a sudden your treasurer is now no longer in the business and they have all the books and they didn't pass them on. And so Dropbox and Google Docs, those type of things are a great tool for you just for all of your chapter documentation, just so that you don't lose it from officer to officer. Let's talk a little bit about advertisers and sponsors on the next slide. So it's important when you're looking at advertisers and sponsors to understand it from the other side, from the person that you're asking for the sponsorship. So our vendors and our affiliates, which we treasure, their companies do their commitments in the fourth quarter for the following year. So the best thing that you can do is plan so that, as Sherry said when you were looking at that calendar, you're requesting commitments in July or August for the upcoming year. You get your packets sent out to all potential sponsors and advertisers, again, just shortly after that August time frame. And then you have their commitments in the fourth quarter, and you collect so that as you start January 1, you have the funds in the bank for January 1, and you're not nervous about what's going to happen with it. And many of the chapters are now going to a strategic partner program with a variety of different levels, and I know we'll be talking about that at the national conference. But if you get online on the WCR site, you'll see a lot of different examples of that. Let's talk also about handling reimbursements. Everybody should have clear policies for your chapter for reimbursing expenses in your standing rules. And it should be broken down into categories so that people understand. And the importance of this is that they understand it before they go on a trip and you're trying to collect on expenses, because if they don't understand what they're being reimbursed for up front, it can cause some problems. One of the easiest tricks that you can do is to use your consent to serve form that you have potential officers sign that outlines their position and the expectations, and you can simply outline the reimbursement policy in that space or refer back to it in your standing rules, but at least have some notice to it and review it with them ahead of time. Again, this allows for no surprises, and we all know in leadership that expectations are everything, and if they know what the expectation is, they'll live within those guidelines. You should also have some deadlines for submitting expenses, and you should use some type of an expense reimbursement form, and there are examples of that on the website, WCR.com, WCR.org. So again, keep records of the reimbursements that you do for your chapter. So if you do get audited, you have an IRS, audit that you've got documentation. And then the other item that we just want to touch base on is debit cards and credit cards for chapters. There are many chapters out there that are doing a debit card or a credit card. And again, it's important just to have some kind of documentation on the policies and procedures for that, and to just be a little bit cautious about it. We certainly, understand that when we have to make advanced travel commitments pretty far out and people are having to use their own funds, that can be difficult from time to time. but we just want to make sure that you have some control and understand who's using the debit card and how that's all working so that you have some tracking. Sherry?
Cindy, thanks. So if you don't have the money, don't spend it. We can't say that enough. So if all you have is this, don't spend that. Okay, next slide, please. So we talked about this, the event budget planning. We talked about considering the responsibility to the event chair and the committee for all the fundraisers that you have. Be sure that the events that you select during the course of the year are going to subsidize what your expenses are, that you are going to be able to raise the amount of money that you need for your expenses. And don't be very detailed on the sources of event revenue. There are unexpected expenses that crop up every time, and you just need to make sure that you don't overestimate the amount of revenue that you have and overspend, so that your chapter can count on what's coming in the items, to use as the items that are budgeted for expenses. So be sure and list all anticipated expenses. And create again, net revenue is what you want to focus on. Net equals gross income less expenses. So, and then develop a timeline, for your, for your fundraising events. So here's a sample event budget. This is for a golf tournament, and if you'll notice, when you go through there, you'll see that they've accounted for the players and the raffle tickets and the grand prize, the putting contest, the dinners, the mulligan tickets that they're going to sell. This is all the revenue. This is a very simple structure here. And then they've included in their revenue the sponsorships that they're getting for the event, all the different levels of sponsorship. And then their expenses at the bottom, what it's going to cost them to pay for the food and the grand prize and the raffle prizes and for the contest winner. So this is very basic. This is really all you need for your events. You see your total expense down there at the bottom and your total revenue. I think this slide kind of got cut off a little because even below there is a net income. So that is, your gross less your expenses equals your net. And then there's some tools that you have available to you on the national website. The Leadership Policy and Procedure Manual is full of great examples for managing budgets. You can find it in the Chapter Tools tab on the website, or you can use the search tool to locate the Leadership Policy and Procedure Manual on the website at WCR.org. And you can even put in LPPM and it will direct you to it. Cindy?
So we thought we'd have a little bit of fun with you guys and maybe do just a basic role play of what it might be like at a board meeting to review the treasurer report and kind of just go through that process with you, just maybe to help a little bit with how that would roll. So we're going to start out. I am going to be the chair, and on your screen is just an example out of the Leadership Policy and Procedure Manual of a normal governing board agenda. And what we'll be doing is we'll be stepping into this. I'll be the chair, and Sherry's going to be the treasurer, and we're just going to kind of go through how this might work. And what you'll be assuming here is that we've already called it to order, we've already approved the minutes, so now we're down to the treasurer report. As you can see the agenda on the slide, so we'll be stepping into this now. So next on the agenda is the financial report. Sherry?
Yes, President Cindy, the Treasury report today, let's see, year to date, our budget is $9,200 and our balance is $7,800. You know, we didn't make as much money as expected at our golf tournament due to the weather. We budgeted $5,000 and we made $3,600, so we're $1,400 short.
Thank you, Sherry. As you can see, this change in our balance will need to be reviewed. Sherry, can you and the Finance Committee please review the situation and come back to our next meeting with some suggestions on what we need to do? We could look at doing another fundraiser, or maybe we'll need to send 2 officers instead of 4 to the November National Conference. Or there may be some other options that your committee comes up with. Let's get creative and come back with a few solutions for the board to review at the next meeting.
President Cindy, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Sherry. And then for all of you on the webinar, of course, the agenda for the meeting would continue, but you understand the reason that we really didn't go further in talking about the details on that is because basically you don't want to do committee work at a board meeting. So let's talk about some of the ways that we might go through this. Just, you know, between Sherry and I, let's just kind of bounce a few things that once she's at her committee meeting that we might be talking about. We talked a little bit about, you know, maybe cutting back on the number of officers traveling.
Yep, and we could send fewer officers to a national meeting. We could, instead of fully funding their trip, we could partially fund their trip.
Exactly. The other thing is we could just do a couple more fundraisers. Maybe one fundraiser would do it for the year, or maybe there's some other things that we've saved money on that if we were looking at the budget, we could see that we might have over-budgeted in one area or the other. So you can see how a committee would really be able to look at that and come up with some great options.
So Cindy, also when looking at the officer travel budget, you should also look at who has voting rights for your chapter at the meeting. Not everybody at that meeting has a vote. So for local chapters, your president, and at the state level, the president and the governors, you all need to look at that.
That's exactly right, because we want the right people to be at the events where they're voting. The most important thing to remember is that you and your board have the responsibility for the finances of your chapter. And just like your business, as we said before, you need to review them regularly so that things stay healthy. Sherry and I want to thank you all for attending. We know your chapter's finance is in your strong hands, and if you have any questions, feel free to email or call us. We're here for you. Thanks so much for attending.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.